I need guidance. I want the guidance because any entrepreneur who doesn't believe that they don't need outside help or advice is going to fail. Okay. You can't make it without advice. Depends on the quality of your advisors.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. Today, I'm pleased to share my conversation with Richard Amato and Jay Frazier. Richard is the executive director of the Austin Technology Incubator, or ATI, a deep tech incubator affiliated with the University of Texas at Austin, and the longest active technology incubator in the country. As Richard explains in our conversation, deep tech, or hard tech, refers to advanced technologies that are based on breakthrough discoveries and disruptive innovations. These are complex, boundary-pushing technologies that take a lot of time, money, and persistence to bring to market. Richard founded the Clean Energy Incubator at ATI back in 2001, and he launched his own alternative energy company in 2006. He also serves as faculty at UT Austin's McCombs School of Business. Jay is president and CEO of New Dominion Enterprises, where his team is developing safer and better performing lithium batteries using technology licensed from the Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory. Jay brings decades of experience in marketing, research and development, and commercialization. And through ATI, he's gained invaluable support and mentorship to navigate the long, complex journey to commercialize deep tech. Please enjoy my conversation with Richard Amato and Jay Frazier. Thank you both for being here. And I wanted to start a little bit with some background and give a little context. I do see that ATI was founded back in '89 by George Kosmetsky, which, as I understand it, is sort of a godfather in the sort of tech entrepreneurial ecosystem in Austin. And this is, by this point, the city has the Silicon Hills nickname, but it was still sort of early days is the sense that I got. And I did see that ATI was the only tech incubator in the city for many years after. So can you talk about how the landscape has changed and how ATI has evolved with it?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Thank you so much for having us here as well. But as you mentioned, ATI was launched 35 years ago. It's the longest continuous running business incubator in the U.S. ATI stands for Austin Technology Incubator, and it is the business incubator of the University of Texas at Austin. So we're part of the university, state university. But interestingly enough, as you mentioned, Dr. Kosmetsky, who founded it, did not found it to become the tech transfer incubator of the university. It was actually founded to be a community asset and to support startups across the community. So over the 35 years, we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies, most of which have actually been within the community, a small minority within the university, but that's transitioning now to focus more on university assets. But as far as the change, it was a general incubator at first. And in 2001, when I was first hired in, I came in to launch the Clean Energy Incubator. And that was really our first foray into a focus of industry or technology. After that, in the mid-2000s, we then launched the what's now known as the healthcare portfolio, which focused on, medical device, life science, and such. And then more recently, just this year, we've launched the microelectronics incubator, which is focused on semiconductors. And I think one of the things that we've seen as we change, as you mentioned, at first we were the only game in town. It was in 2009 when the Capital Factory was launched. And then since then, over the last 15 years, there's literally dozens and dozens of incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, and other support organizations. And so one of the transitions we saw in that 10 to 15 year period was starting to focus more on deep tech. technology heavily rooted in R&D and the science and technology, stuff that's hardware based, could be software, but it's usually very capital intensive, long time to market. And I think that was probably the biggest shift we've seen as we've also focused on our industry verticals as well.
Can I ask you you did just describe and define Deeptech, but could you give some examples of Deeptech and how that is distinct from other types of sort of tech that people think about?
Deeptech, like in the early days, we had everything from software-based applications to vibration dampening golf grips. Nowadays, we're dealing with things that are much more capital intense. I mean, Jay, who's going to talk, is a perfect example. NDE, it's coming out of one of the federal labs. A inorganic liquid electrolyte for electric vehicles that falls within our mobility and transportation sector of the sustainability portfolio. Not Deeptech would be somebody who has developed a parking app that will allow you to better find or park your car, right? Still falls within mobility transportation, still could be considered sustainable, but that's not really considered deep tech. So deep tech usually, as I mentioned, is hardware based, oftentimes, coming out of a lab, whether that be a university lab or a federal research lab, and is something that's going to take longer to get to market. So when we work with them, we're working with companies usually for multiple years, when oftentimes incubators and accelerators are working, maybe 18 to 24 months max. An accelerator may be a cohort base where it could be 6 to 9 months. We're working with companies for, 2 to 3, sometimes 4 to 5 years.
Great. And that's I'm glad that you made that point, because that part of what sets you apart. You have to make your approach fit the type of member companies that you're doing. Are there other pieces of that approach that have to sort of specifically be tailored to the kinds of companies and portfolio that you're working with?
Yes, I think, one of our strong value propositions is our TXVMS program, which stands for the Texas Venture Mentor Service. TXVMS is basically, we have a bench of approximately 100 mentors in there from all walks of life, serial entrepreneurs to accountants to lawyers to engineers, people that have never started businesses, people that have started businesses. It's the breadth and the depth of experience. And we do group mentoring where we'll set up teams of about 4 to 5 mentors to work with the companies. And in doing so, it's basically providing kind of a nice breadth of experience to the innovators. And throughout time, we will adjust those teams as necessary to make sure, depending on where they are in their development, that they have the right people in the team. Because often, as we mentioned, we're working with teams over longer periods. Early on, many of these deep tech will really be focused on validating the technology. We're focusing more on helping them with the go-to-market strategy, but that will shift as the technology gets validated, as they start to focus more on building out the team, starting to develop customers, pilots, and get closer to actually going to market.
So, Jay, I would love to sort of bring in your experience here. Let's start with New Dominion.
We started New Dominion because my previous company had a relationship with Idaho National Laboratory under a defense contract. And that's when I met Dr. Harrop, who is my co-founder. Mm-hmm. So that we had developed a relationship during that Department of Defense contract. When he left Idaho National Laboratory, he reached out to me and said, "Do you want to do this?" And I had him ask. I had to ask him, "What is this?" And he told me. And at the time, I had, frankly, nothing else to do, and I was sort of pushed into not retirement so much as to sort of a holding pattern between opportunities, because my previous company had lost traction, I'll say. So when Mason asked me, I said yes. And that goes to one of the primary principles I believe is critical in technology transfer and is lacking very often, is that relationships are everything. And for an entrepreneur to be as frankly insane to go to a national lab as a small company and want to license the technology and go forth with it, you need to have the relationship with the originator of the technology that helps to structure and formulate what the business actually is. And so Mason and I had, Dr. Harrop and I had become friends, colleagues over a period of time. And in early 2015, he reached out to me and I said yes. And we eventually incorporated the company and started the company and had some fits and starts, getting started even. And it's now, Richard, approaching 6 years since I've been involved with ATI. And one of the things that sticks in my mind was my first VMS meeting was one of the gentlemen that had been put together on my team, who is a battery professional, looked me square in the face. This is before COVID, so we were having face-to-face meetings. And he looks at me and says, "You realize what you're trying to do is very hard." And I said, "Yes, I do." Now, I really didn't understand what his comment was, and I don't think he understood where I was coming from, because commercializing a technology licensed from a national laboratory is probably one of the more difficult things anybody ever wants to try and do, especially if you're a small company. You're a small company with no money, and you go off and you negotiate a license with a national laboratory, hopefully getting something that's beneficial, more slanted to the business than it is to the laboratory or to the Department of Energy or to the managing company. And then you realize that the technology that you've just licensed is not ready for prime time. Secret, they don't, and I'm not intending to be negative at all, but the reality is that you can go and license a technology from a national laboratory and it's not ready. It's been graduated from the laboratory, or at least it's been qualified at the laboratory level to be ready to be licensed. But the task of taking that licensed technology and actually commercializing it is something that is not for the meek. When I started in technology transfer in 1991, my mentors then were the two gentlemen who ran the tech transfer office at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And my primary mentor was the dean of the engineering school at the State University of New York at Farmingdale. And Dr. Ezra at Farmingdale instilled in me the outrage of a taxpayer, realizing how much money is actually spent in national laboratories, and in this case, the Department of Energy laboratories, on technology that never gets anywhere. It's maybe used for a government application, and the reason why the government has funded the scientists to solve a specific problem. But taking that technology and then commercializing it is way beyond the imagination of a lot of people. And interestingly enough, I've had discussions with some of my colleagues in the Defense Department, especially those who speak about innovation. And they believe that the Valley of Death begins when you get an SBIR. No. The Valley of Death began when you catch the illness of believing that you've just found a nugget of gold at the National Laboratory that has a commercial application, because a good entrepreneur sees the potential. And in my case, I have a partner who is a visionary scientist who spent almost his entire career solving the problem of why does a lithium ion battery not work sometimes? And he came upon the idea that it was the electrolyte that was causing the problem of wear out, flames, explosions, and all the other things that everybody reads about when it comes to the bad side of lithium ion. And he spent his career on and off between federal grants and contracts over 17 years. This was his passion.
Right.
He got other contracts on other programs to keep his job and to keep his program going. But what he really wanted to do was to develop this technology. And because he and I were friends, then when he asked me, I said, sure. And that started the journey across the valley of death.
But at that point, did you know, because that was not your first entry into federal tech transfer, did you know what you were walking into in terms of the challenges and being so early stage? Were you just too optimistic and enthusiastic to care?
I knew what I was getting into. But again, most people wouldn't have done what I did. An entrepreneur can go in and have an understanding of what it means to take a technology from a national laboratory and run with it. And that's what my VMS mentor was he was talking about how hard it is to introduce a new technology in the battery world, because the battery world, the innovation cycle is generally 12 to 15 years.
It's a long haul.
Overlay that with the absolute difficulty of grabbing a technology out of a national laboratory, having an understanding of where you want to go, have no money at the time, and then start to try to commercialize that. And the first search is to find, the first idea of what a customer is.
Right.
Okay, what's the benefit? What's the customer? What's the rationale of why are we doing this? So I suspect that it takes a bit of, Richard, you can tell me I'm wrong, but I think I'm right, a little bit of an insanity. As a small businessman, the dynamic is completely different if you're a large company that has funds and has an internal R&D program that says, there's a technology at Argonne National Laboratory that can help us in a strategic way to solve our problem. But if you're a small entrepreneur, would I do it again? Probably.
I have to say too, and it's so funny because you are not the first guest I've interviewed who was an entrepreneur and called himself crazy basically for taking on. He said the exact same thing. And he said, I needed, he said, I had these skills, I had this drive. He said, but also I just had a little bit of crazy and I know that I'm in for a 10-year haul.
Can I just add something? I mean, I've worked in a lot of companies and I've started a few companies myself. And as an entrepreneur, you have to be a little bit crazy and you have to be eternally optimistic because everybody is telling you, no, this isn't going to work, right? And so there's a bit of that persistence, which people may call crazy, but most entrepreneurs usually underestimate what it's going to take because they're so tied in with it. So I think the key thing, and one reason why Jay's been so successful is this persistence and that's, I think, if you look across the board, especially when we're talking deep tech, because as we mentioned before, if it's not deep tech, if you're talking software, apps, whatever, those are quick, time to market, low capital cost. They're not easy, but they're easier, right? And when you're talking deep tech, you're talking it's heavy, high capital cost, long time to market, a lot of persistence, and a lot of technology challenges in addition to market challenges, right? And you got to be a little bit crazy to do that.
I think if I hadn't had my earlier training, which as a real surprise for the technology world, I started my career on Madison Avenue as an account person on packaged goods clients, Procter & Gamble specifically, and I learned marketing, not selling, marketing, strategy, product positioning, all those interesting things that you do with the tube of toothpaste. But when you start applying that to a technology, it tends to make, in this case, New Dominion, very unique in the battery world. Because I'm probably one of the only people that in that industry that have the type of training that I have. And the skill sets aren't all that different. It's just a matter of application to it. So it's somewhat of a vision that you see the potential of the technology. And really, I didn't understand the technology or didn't even see the technology until I started speaking to Mason Harrop. And he explained to me why he had started doing the work. Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, I think one of the things that a person needs to do when they are engaged in technology transfer and trying to take a technology out of a national laboratory, why did the scientists do it in the first place? Understand the motivation. Because that often becomes the driving force between what you're trying to accomplish. ATI put together a mentoring team for me that has 3 battery executives plus a very skilled and experienced researcher and Richard in the clean energy world, on the clean tech world. So the combination has given me something that most small companies do not have access to, which is an advisory committee that actually has the ability to help steer the entrepreneur's thinking. And I will absolutely admit that ATI has caused me to not change my direction so much, but to fine tune what I was doing so that it made more sense to the outside world.
I want to jump back to something you said a few minutes ago, Richard, do you feel that, especially when you're dealing with sort of student entrepreneurs and younger entrepreneurs, do you have a way to test if they're going to be able to make it through this long process? Or do you feel a responsibility to lift the veil from their eyes and give them a little reality check about what they're in for when they're starting this process?
Well, I mean, I don't really look at the young versus old or the age, more so the experience. I mean, 25-year-old can have more experience than a 60-year-old, right? It just depends on the conditions they've been put within. But one thing that's very important when we evaluate companies, and probably the most important thing, is what we call coachability. In other words, is the entrepreneur, are they willing to listen? Are they willing to work with the incubator? Or do they think they know everything and all they're looking for are connections, right? And so the tenor of the entrepreneur is really important. And in a sense, in evaluating coachability and trying to determine where their experience has been and do they know what they're in for, such. If they don't know what they're in for, but they're coachable and we'll work with them and we can try to guide them along. And I think, as Jay points out, that's one of the key things within the VMS, the Metro program, is we have such a wealth of experience. We have great teams we can put together that can help them on their journey. But then there are those that, regardless of how old or how young they think they know how to do everything, oftentimes we'll just pass on those, right? Because we know that if we do need to help try to prepare them for this long journey, they're likely not going to be as accepting of our advice. So preparing them is really key and important, but more important for us is just how malleable and willing are they to work with us and our teams and such.
Right.
I want to add something. When I first started with ATI, there was a team, and ATI had an approach to me or to my company and me in terms of guiding me. And at one point, I was asked to join the ATI mentor program at a luncheon. And I pulled Richard and Mitch Jacobson, who was the previous director, aside, and I said, we've got to talk. And I said, this isn't working for me. And I said, and I guess it was Mitch who said, yes, but we generally take this approach to our entrepreneurs. It's called tough love. And I said, does this look like it needs tough love? I don't need tough love. I need guidance.
Mm-hmm.
I need guidance. I want the guidance, because any entrepreneur who doesn't believe that they don't need outside help or advice is going to fail. Okay. You can't make it without advice. Depends on the quality of your advisors. And after having that conversation about, I don't need tough love, I need advice, I need guidance, I need help, we made one change in the mentoring team, which was a critical change. And I think ever since then, I've been very receptive to the guidance that I get, because we stopped with this tough love stuff and started giving me advice, started giving me what you get from a large consulting firm when you've gone and engaged with them as an entrepreneur to help bring the company forward.
One quick point on, tough love. I mean, as an incubator, it's our job to help the company de-risk and get to market as quickly as possible, right? And what that means is, we've got to work with a company with brutal honesty. It's not like everything's going to be fine. It's like, no, this is what you need. Or do. I mean, sometimes some of the best advice we can give an entrepreneur is you need to shut down your company. It's just not, and entrepreneurs don't want to hear that, right? But the analogy I often use, it's kind of like when you're in a relationship, it's like if you're so in love with the person, you have a lot of people telling you that's not a good relationship, right? But you're kind of blinded. And I think as an entrepreneur, you're so focused on your business. I've been there before. It's your baby, right? It's everything to you, that sometimes you need hard questions being asked and things. It doesn't mean that it's always negative, but what it does mean is that sometimes difficult decisions need to be made, or advice needs to be given. It's all for the purpose of moving things forward.
Of course. And ultimately, I'm sure at least a portion of those entrepreneurs are hopefully grateful down the line that they didn't end up wasting more time.
Exactly.
But I would imagine that experience, your own entrepreneurial experience, really gives you some necessary compassion or understanding with the people in your incubator. Have you ever been in the companies that you started? Did you ever participate in an incubator? Have you ever been on the other side?
I have. One of the companies I launched, which was Venti Energy, which was a renewable energy play, a development group focused on utility scale renewables, we actually became part of ATI in the early days. So yeah, I've been on both sides of the spectrum. So knowing how challenging it can be, and it's two completely different perspectives. And I think that's really important to be able to have that perspective of having started a company and knowing some of the challenges, because while a lot of it is the technical piece, the marketing piece and all of that, probably one of the most important pieces is the psychological piece. And supporting the entrepreneurs, because being an entrepreneur can be a very lonely job. And it's just, Jay and I have some great conversations. Sometimes it's just, being a sounding board to listen to and provide advice back when he may not want to go to his own board of advisors, because he's not, he needs to think freely and to basically be able to have somebody or a group, an organization that he can talk to, or anyone can talk to. An entrepreneur can talk to kind of work through things. And I think having been in an entrepreneur's shoes before, having done that, there's a lot of nuances that just aren't in the books, right?
Do you ever miss I have not started any businesses, so I'm just imagining myself in those shoes. Do you ever miss sort of that rush of progress as you're getting your company up and going, or do you feel like you kind of get a bit of that vicariously through?
Yes and yes. I do miss it, but you do get kind of that vicarious experience. But you don't also have all, starting a business is not easy, right? So, I often get asked, will you ever start another business? And probably so down the line, but with my personal situation right now and kids and all, I want to have time because as Jay knows, I mean, it's a 24/7, 365 job, right? Even when you're not working on it, you're thinking about it, right? And so it's an incredible opportunity in my role right now to be as close as I can to it and be able to work within that creative infrastructure of building businesses and supporting others. It's as close as you can get without doing it yourself. And, I love that process, and I will probably get back to it one of these days, but I'm really happy doing what I'm doing right now.
To find out more about Richard, Jay, ATI, and New Dominion, check on the resources on this episode page at federallabs.org. Thanks to our producer and digital marketing manager, Carly Dunow, graphics manager, Danny Batchelor, web content and systems manager, Jess Klein, and the FLC staff and community for your support. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back in 2 weeks on Transfer Files Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.